Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Andrea. It's nice to have you guys here. I've got my coffee. I've got my laptop with my notes. This video is going to be more dissertation tips. So I've done a video on my kind of top tips for writing a PhD dissertation. Those tips also will apply to writing a master's thesis, any kind of long-form academic work. If you're an undergrad and you have to write an honors thesis or a capstone project, I think a lot of these tips would also help. I think a lot of these tips probably also help if you're doing creative writing. So if you're someone who follows me for my creative writing and my book content, this video might also be applicable. This video is going to kind of give you some more tips for writing your dissertation, but this one focuses more on the psychological side of writing, which is why I do say that I think this could help with a lot of creative writing, because any kind of long-form, sustained writing project can start messing with your head just a little bit. And so this is a video that's been kind of in my notes, in my list for a while, but I know I started writing this down and writing these thoughts down at least a few months ago. But I've noticed that just based on my analytics, my Scrivener video is still getting a lot of hits, and that dissertation, that tips for writing a dissertation video has been popping up in the rankings. So it's summer. A lot of you are probably just starting your dissertations. I know I started writing mine in June of 2017 and then was done by the following spring. Some of you might be continuing to work on yours. If you're in your second or third year of writing, this might be finally you're having time to come back to it. Summer tends to be a very productive, or hopefully productive, time for academics. So I thought this was kind of a good time to finally get this video up. These are focusing more on tips that help you manage the psychological side of writing. So tip number one is having a consistent daily writing / work process or practice. Process or practice, either one. So I tried to write, or at least work. If I couldn't write, I tried to be at my desk working on my diss for at least 2 to 3 hours a day. It's kind of 3 hours a day during the summer when I had more time, and then I dropped down to like an hour and a half to 2 hours when the fall semester started back up that year that I was writing, and I was back teaching and just had more kind of pulls on my time. But having just that time blocked out, 2 hours a day, every day, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to work on my dissertation. Some days it wasn't possible, and be kind to yourself if you have a day where you just can't manage it. But even on my worst day mentally, when I was really, really struggling, I could still review one section of my diss, or I could write a couple paragraphs, even if they were bad. A lot of times they were bad. That's what editing is for. I could edit some stuff that I've already written. So if the new words were not coming, then I could spend that time editing something I'd already written. Or if I couldn't focus on editing, I could go back and reread one of my sources. If something just wasn't clicking or I wasn't understanding something, then I could go back and read or review my notes. Sometimes just doing 15 minutes of free writing was massively helpful. And then walking away until the next day made a big difference mentally and emotionally, while still allowing me to come back the next day. So like even on a day when I couldn't do anything, it's kind of one of my little mini tips that probably is going to feel a little bit kind of, I don't know, just a bit kind of silly probably. Free writing for just 15 minutes. So on a day that I just could not get anything else done, where my brain was just rebelling so hard, like it just the horses were making a break out of the barn, could not sit at my desk and I just did not want to work. So even on those really, really bad days, free writing for just 15 minutes, even if half of what I was free writing was talking about how much I didn't want to write. Just that mental trick of being able to say, I've sat at my desk for 15 minutes thinking, however abstractly, about my dissertation. I could then walk away and come back the next day and feel like you did something yesterday, now you're going to get back to work again today. Whereas if I just didn't sit down at all and didn't open the file, didn't at least look at it, sometimes just scrolling back through what you've written, even if you don't write anything down, even if you don't edit anything, you just read it, it keeps your brain somewhat in that space. And so it doesn't become this thing of, I didn't do any work yesterday, So I'm just not going to bother today. And then the next day you still don't bother. And then before you know it, it's been days or weeks or months since you've touched it. I took breaks on the weekends. I didn't make myself work on the weekends, but Monday through Friday, at the very, very, very least, I had to look at it for at least 15 minutes. At least 15 minutes. You can manage 15 minutes, and the psychological impact that will have in feeling like you haven't broken that schedule, that structure of a little bit every day. Even if you have a day, most PhD students are also teaching, or they're on a committee, or they're doing something. They've got a research project or lab hours they're required to do. Like, everyone's PhD program is a little bit different, but one thing that's the same, every PhD student is busy. They're all busy, but everyone has at least 15 minutes that they can spend. And so even if you have a whole week where all you've done is 15 minutes a day, just 15 minutes can make a huge difference. But obviously, if you can have like an hour or 2 hours, the more time you can spend every day, the better. But I wouldn't recommend doing more than 3 hours in a day. I would never recommend forcing yourself to do 5 or 6 hours every day, especially not if you're also balancing a teaching load or a research assistantship or something like that. But even if you are one of those magical unicorns that has a fellowship and a scholarship, and you don't have anything else pulling on your time, you don't have a spouse, you don't have kids, you really do have all the time in the world, I still don't think I'd recommend spending more than a few hours a day actively working on your dissertation, because those 3 hours, those 2 to 3 hours, are very psychologically intense, and it eventually will burn you out. So you do have to pace yourself. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So that also kind of leads into my second tip, which is time off. While working consistently is important, giving yourself breaks is also important. So with time off and breaks, I mean both taking short breaks throughout the day, like 5 to 30 minutes. So giving yourself a 5-minute break once or twice an hour, giving yourself a 30-minute break to an hour-long break in the middle of your day to get up, to move around, to make some lunch, call a friend, watch a YouTube video, do something, just completely disconnect is important. And this is where I really relied on the Pomodoro method. So setting a timer for 25 minutes and then taking a 5-minute break after that. So every 30 minutes, I was working for 25 of those minutes and then taking a break for the last 5. But it also means, when I say take off, I also mean taking a day or 2 off every week is important. Give yourself a weekend. Treat your PhD like a job. Now, yes, some jobs do require you to work 60, 70 hours a week, but those jobs are also usually paying you a lot more, and that's why they can demand more of your time. Don't feel like you have to be spending 60, 70, 80 hours a week working on your PhD. Have some work-life balance. Now, I wasn't perfect on this when I was a PhD student. I'm still not perfect about it now as an instructor. I'm getting there. But giving yourself time off is important. Now, everyone's job situation, everyone's financial structure in terms of how they're funding a PhD is different. So some people might work on the weekends, or you have a family, and so weekend is the time to really kind of focus on your family. But you still need at least some time every week that is just for you, that is not for dealing with your family, that is not for working on your dissertation, that is not for your students, it is just for you. So if you can't take the whole weekend just for yourself, take one day, take a half a day. If you're married and you have kids, or if you have a partner and have kids, take turns with your partner where for 2 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday, you have the kids so they can have some time, and then 2 hours where they have the kids so you can have some time. It's important that you are taking time to, indulge in a hobby, or read just for fun, or zone out watching Netflix or YouTube. Whatever helps you disconnect, but taking some time every week to completely disconnect from your project is really important. This is especially important for any scholars doing work in more sensitive areas. So for me, my research was on fashion icons and clothing and identity construction. That's not that emotionally taxing. I really enjoyed my project. but I had friends who, were doing PhDs relating to like critical race theory or gender and sexuality, or things that were a little bit more sensitive, things that were a little bit deeper. And that's not to knock my own research, but my research didn't bring up any kind of traumatic thoughts or memories or anything like that. So if you are doing research that is bringing up more traumatic things or thoughts or feelings, then in your case especially, it's important that you give yourself time off to completely disconnect from the work you're doing and remind yourself that there are good things in the world. Some scholars do this incredible research that focus on all the problems of the world, and that research is so important. And if you're doing that kind of research, that's amazing, and your research is so important, and I know that your research is going to really help a lot of people, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And so if your research is emotionally draining to you, you need to take time every week, and then probably a little bit more time every month. Like if you can't take all weekend, every weekend off, at least one weekend a month or one weekend every 6 weeks, you do need to give yourself time to have a couple full days completely off. So being mindful of giving yourself time off throughout the day as well as throughout the week, and then also kind of throughout the semester. Winter break and summer break tend to be times of a lot of kind of heightened activity and productivity for us, but still giving yourself like that first week after grades are due to just not do anything. So giving yourself that kind of time off and thinking about time off in a number of different ways, kind of on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, is really important. Next tip, don't judge, just write. Often when scholars, when PhD students, PhD candidates, you learn this very early on, we tend to compare, we tend to judge, and writing is hard because every word we write, we're thinking, is that the best word? Is there another word I can use? Is that the best way to write this sentence? And you could spend an hour just writing one sentence. And I hear this as well with people who want to take on creative writing work as well, that they've got all these ideas and they're really excited about this project, but they just don't know where to start, or they're afraid to start, or they've started writing and then they stop, and just they're judging themselves. And what I always tell my students, my writing students, is you can't edit a blank page. You can't edit a dissertation that you haven't written yet. You can't edit a novel that you haven't written yet. So don't think about the problems. Just write something. That is what draft work is for. Your first draft, just FYI, your first draft is going to suck. And don't send your first draft to your committee either. It's another, I don't think I mentioned this. That might have been in my other advice video, but I'll say it again if I did. Don't send your first draft to your committee. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Your first draft is going to be crap. Your first draft is going to suck. And if you haven't read the essay, Shitty First Drafts, go read that. It's meant for undergrads, but I think sometimes grad students need to read it as well. Your first draft is going to suck. It just is. And that's fine, because it's a first draft. You're not married to your first draft. But once you've at least put something down on paper, it's a lot easier to go back and edit it and fix it. So I think I sent my committee my second draft of things. So I gave myself permission to just write a really bad first draft of each chapter. And then I went back through the chapter and I fixed it. And I made as many edits as I could. So I had a tendency to judge my writing way too harshly. And so sometimes even with my second or third drafts, I would go through, I would make all these edits, I would make all these changes, I would feel like I'm doing the best I can, I'm telling the best story I can, I don't know what else I can do, but it still just doesn't feel right, it still feels like it's really bad. But I would just give up and I would send it to my advisor, and she'd send back her notes and then permission to send it on to the rest of my committee, and her notes were looks good. I mean, she'd have other notes of where I specifically could make fixes, but it was never, moral of the story, my writing was never as bad as I was afraid it was. I think also this is where having a really good advisor helps. Obviously, I know that there is a huge problem in academia with having toxic chairs and toxic advisors. I was very lucky that I managed to avoid that situation. So If you can't trust your chair, this kind of then leads into the next tip, so I'll kind of move on to that. Know when to reach out for help. Now for me, that was my chair. That was my dissertation chair, my main advisor. I knew I could trust her. She is very trustworthy. She was a brilliant scholar in her own right. She was very interested in my project. She wanted me to succeed. She believed in me. So she was someone I could trust. And my other committee members were the same way. And so when it came to writing and sharing my drafts, I was never afraid to send it to my advisor. I wouldn't send it to her until I knew I had done everything I could and made it the best that I could make it. But even if I still felt like it's not good, if I've done everything I can, rather than continuing to edit myself in circles, I would just send it on and I would tell her, here's what I think I've done well, here's where I'm struggling, here's where I'm just not sure if I'm really making my argument as strongly as I can, and I'd call attention to certain areas that I wanted her help on. In terms of my committee, before I was really writing, like while I was still actively trying to write stuff, I remember meeting up with one of my committee members early in the writing process. I'd had a meeting with my chair, we'd talked about stuff, I thought I kind of figured out what I was doing. I went away, I started writing, and I was still struggling. And so I contacted one of my committee members who I'd worked with before. She kind of understands how my head works. We met up at Starbucks, and she would just ask me questions, get me talking about my project. And she would write handwritten notes. Everything I was saying, she would write it all down. And I would come away, we did that twice, and both times I came away from those meetings with like 4 pages front and back, so 8 pages total of handwritten notes. And after that first meeting, I remember going home, typing that up, and having, I think it was like 1,000 or 1,500 really good words, and feeling like this is my structure. I know what I'm doing now. I would have never had those experiences of feeling like, okay, like this problem is solved now, or this problem is fixed, I can move forward. I would not have had those experiences if I hadn't reached out for help. Now, if you are in a situation where your advisor is not a safe place, because some people do have to choose advisors based on other factors and not just because they know they're necessarily a good person and someone they want to work with. So if you have that kind of toxic environment, you're not really that comfortable with your advisor, you don't feel your advisor is a safe person. If one of your committee members is, then you can reach out to them. If there's another professor who's not part of your committee but who is kind of a safe space, if there's a professor that you have a connection with or a relationship with at another university, maybe if you're doing your PhD, but there's a professor from your master's that you can reach out to. Other grad students, particularly advanced levels, so if there's someone, if you're starting your dissertation, but there's someone who's almost done or someone who's recently graduated. I had a lot of friends who were a few years ahead of me, and so when I got to my dissertation, a couple of them were already graduated and had been through that process. You probably, even if your advisor isn't necessarily a safe space that you can ask for help from, there's probably someone else that you can trust that you can reach out to and ask for help, to meet up for coffee and bounce around ideas, or who can look over a draft of a chapter or something like that. So don't feel like you have to do it by yourself. If you can rely on your chair, let your chair help you. If there's another committee member that you feel a little bit more comfortable with, let them help you. There's probably someone, either another professor or another student, another PhD candidate, who you can trust. And that's why from early in your PhD program, it is good to start building those networks and finding people who you feel like you can trust and build that trust with them. So knowing when to reach out for help and not being afraid to do that is really, really important, because you can spend a lot of time twisting yourself into knots and running around in circles, not making any progress because you don't know how to move forward. So asking for help in those cases is really important. Related to that, creating a writing group or having a writing buddy can also be really helpful. If there's someone else in your program or another grad student who you've connected with online, if you don't follow academiology on Instagram, that's kind of one of the accounts I've been following. There's a number of other PhD communities on Instagram, on Twitter. So connecting with other academics online who aren't in your program and who you maybe won't feel like you're in direct competition with for anything can also be helpful. And so connecting online with other academics, other people kind of at the same place in their programs as you, can be really helpful to kind of build that network, build that culture of support, and then connect with people who can work as like a writing buddy or form a writing group. I know that Academiology on her account over the last year has run, or the last year and plus, a little bit more than a year, she does 100 days of dissertation kind of challenge. And so everyone kind of unites with the hashtag. Using online spaces like that to kind of create some of those networks of support can also be really helpful. And then finally, at the risk of making this video too long, my last tip, and it's kind of the big one, but also it's the simplest one, but also the hardest one. Don't give in to imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is so prevalent in academia, and it's so easy to make yourself feel like everyone else is better than you and that your work is rubbish. And it's all lies. It's all lies. Imposter syndrome lies to you, and it wants you to think that you are horrible and don't know what you're doing. Imposter syndrome will always tell you that other people are better than you. And it will always highlight their successes while minimizing your successes and calling attention to your failures. We all have successes and failures. If we only focus on failures, we are ignoring the things that we have done really well and the things that we have excelled at. So not giving in to imposter syndrome is really, really important, even if you have to stick up a little sticky note telling yourself, imposter syndrome is lying to me. That alone can be a huge reminder. So not giving into that, not dwelling in that. Recognize those thoughts when you're having them. Recognize, okay, this is my imposter syndrome talking, and then moving on from those thoughts. Redirect and focus on something you're doing well. If you're focusing on what you haven't gotten done in that day, shift your focus and think about what you have done that day. Those are my tips. I hope this has been helpful. If it has, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. Subscribe if you're not subscribed for more research, productivity, writing related, all kinds of different videos that will be coming up. I would love to have you here, so subscribe if you're not. That would be great. Say hi in the comments. Let me know how you manage the psychological aspects of writing a dissertation. If any of these tips help you, if there are any tips that I haven't mentioned, please list them down below. That would be great. Or just say hi in the comments, that would be great as well. And I will see you all soon in the next video. Thank you very much for watching this one. Bye-bye.